Hi, everyone, and welcome to a very special live recording of Cap Actions the Tent, your place for politics, policy, and progress. I'm Daniella Gibbs Léger.
And I'm Jesse Lee. Uh, First of all, I want to say that was the longest I've heard our intro track run ever, and it was much hotter than I even knew.
It's funky.
And
It's real funky.
yeah, it's like some Medeski and Wood stuff from the old school days. Yeah, so for our returning listeners, you're used to us talking about the grimy politics. Sometimes they're bleak, sometimes they're hopeful, but also a little bleak. And we thought after a year of pandemic, it would be good to take a little break and talk about vacation and traveling. And yeah, we're very excited.
Yeah, and to our new listeners, thanks for taking some time today to join us. If you like what you hear today, and of course you will, and want to keep learning more about progressive politics and policy, you can catch new episodes of the podcast every Thursday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Cap Action's website, or wherever you go to get your podcasts. And we hope you keep coming back.
Yeah, and this week it's going to be a unique event, and you're going to have opportunity to ask questions. Should be kind of apparent on your screen after we do the interview. So stick around and chime in, and kind of be a part of the party this time.
So without further ado, I think we can go ahead and introduce our guest for this week's interview. We are delighted to share a screen today with Scott Keyes, the founder and perhaps the most useful travel tool out there today that isn't a map, Scott's Cheap Flights. Scott is an alumnus of the Center for American Progress, where he has worked as a reporter for Think Progress. His now famous travel tool for finding the best airline deals started out as a small newsletter back in 2013. I remember those days fondly, and has grown to a thriving business with 2 million, that's right, I said million subscribers. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today.
It is so awesome to be back at CAP. Thank you so much to the both of you for having me.
Just to start off, maybe you can talk about how you grew from, a life in politics, which I think me and Dee would be happy to, argue is like a worthwhile life, to pursuing, a dream. And this is like, for me, this is very much my kind of like two loves in life is doing the work of kind of advancing progress and justice in the world, but also taking the time I can to like see the whole world and, do it in a way that I can afford and like make the most of it. And so you've kind of like captured my twin dreams, as it were. Can you talk a little bit of how you kind of made that transition and how you kind of came to like believe that you could, pursue this other half of your dream?
Yeah, absolutely. The funny thing about the way that Scott's Cheap Flights got founded is it is the complete opposite of the way most companies get founded. In the entrepreneurial and startup world, most startup founders come into it really wanting to found a company, to do a startup, and they're just looking for their $1 million idea. Is it going to be autonomous vehicles? Is it going to be, I don't know, paleo fake, imitation meat burgers? Is it going to be a think tank? For me, I didn't come at it at all like that. I was somebody who just loved to travel, who didn't have much money in the bank, and who wanted to try to find these cheap flights that everybody was talking about, but I could never seem to find myself. As Danielle mentioned, I moved to DC in 2010. I was working as a reporter. I was traveling a fair amount. I was starting to get a good stash of frequent flyer miles, but I still had no idea, how is it that people are getting these cheap flights to Europe, to Asia, to Africa? And how can I go about getting those for myself? Because, as a fresh college graduate, I just didn't have much savings to fall back on. I really kind of put on my reporter hat. I dove in. I started researching this a lot. just kind of with a real hunger of trying to figure out what are all the different steps, methods, tricks that people use to get cheap flights and what's kind of fact and what's fiction. It all culminated in 2013 when I got, still to this day, the best deal that I've ever gotten in my life, which was nonstop from New York City to Milan for $130 round trip.
Wow.
I know, it's still to this day, it gives me a little heart palpitations.
If you have like another ticket, please.
Well, that was the funny
For
thing.
me.
After I got back from this trip, all my friends and coworkers, you know, at CAP and elsewhere kept coming up to me, "Hey, Scott, I heard about that great deal you got. Hey, listen, next time you get in on it, next time you find a deal like that, can you let me know so I can get in on it too?" Danielle, you might have even been one of the ones who had asked me that. And what I realized is by the 7th or 8th person who had asked me, I realized, gosh, I'm not going to be able to remember everybody I need to let know. Why don't I start just a simple little email list? And this way I can let everybody know at once. And so in that moment, Scott's Cheap Flights was born, but it was just a hobby. It was something I was doing just for fun, for the love of the game for the next 2 years or so, until it had finally grown large enough that I'm a little embarrassed to say, it graduated out of the free tier of MailChimp. And so they were starting to charge me $50 a month. And that was I just like, oh, it grind my gears a little bit. I was like, oh, $50 a month in order for the privilege to send cheap flight alerts to my friends. But I also realized on the other end, gosh, I wonder if there's finally a business opportunity here. Clearly, there's a lot of demand. Again, coming at this as somebody who was not an aspiring entrepreneur who really wanted to start a company, but coming in as somebody who just loved cheap flights, loved to be able to travel. And then finally, when it was staring him in the face, gosh, there's a demand here. Why don't I see if there's a little company I can start around this?
Yeah, and what were some of the kind of like obstacles you saw along the way in terms of kind of developing this company? And like, I think it's very easy to kind of, uh, look at businesses and say, well, here's how you're doing your employees wrong, and here's like, how you're kind of exploiting people even. And how did you kind of go from your work before kind of making those kind of critiques to trying to enact those kind of values into your own business?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this is one of those things that for me, not coming at this as an aspiring entrepreneur, but coming at this as somebody who was, very well steeped in the progressive reporting and advocacy sphere. I wanted to live out my values. I didn't want to be running a company where we were trying to grind out every possible cent of value and send that to shareholders rather than having it be something that employees are really kind of enjoying from the ground up. And so that was everything from making sure that we were paying really good salary no matter where you lived. We basically peg our salary to the median San Francisco salary, even if you live in Pierre, South Dakota, or if you live in, Minneapolis, or you live in New Orleans, you're still going to be making that really high median salary. Look from the get-go, instituting, parental leave, paid 3 months for everybody, no questions asked. Doing a very kind of liberal vacation policy where it's not only unlimited vacation, but we actually realized, this is one of those things coming from the progressive sphere where you hear oftentimes, okay, unlimited vacation, but when you actually look at usage, oftentimes that means people use less than they would because maybe they're a little sheepish about taking it. They might seem like they're flaky or not working as hard. So we realized we don't want that. We want people to take vacation. We think they'll be better workers as a result. And so not only are we going to have an open vacation policy, we're going to say it is actually a 3-week minimum that you have to take per year. We're going to be checking up on you. We're going to make sure that you are getting out, taking breaks from work, because we think not only are you going to enjoy that and be better as a person, but it's going to be better for the company in the long run as well. So trying to find kind of opportunities for those sorts of living out of progressive values has been it's been really fun and interesting from this side of the divide as a business owner and a company like a found up starter. But one of the things I've realized that it's far less daunting than many, I think, business owners or startups might say, oh, I can't afford this. Oh, that. You can invest in your people. Like you can do a really good job doing it, and your business will I think, benefit for that in the long run. And the reason why I know is because I've done it with Scott's Cheap Flights.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, one of the things I've seen throughout my career is I think people forego vacations not just because they're overly ambitious or something and feel like it makes them look bad, but they feel like it puts more work on their colleagues, which is actually kind of a conflicting progressive value. But when you set that kind of standard of like, actually, this is good for all of us, and we pick up each other's slack, and that helps all of us kind of stay stable and not burnt out. I think that's a really kind of important mental shift in kind of the progressive community and probably American business writ large. I want to hand this to
I'm so glad you touch on burnout there, because that is such an omnipresent threat to everybody, but especially, younger folks who are working really kind of at the grind. And I don't think enough shrift get enough credence gets paid to it, because look, I've experienced burnout. A lot of coworkers of mine have experienced burnout. It's something that really can be detrimental to your ability to be, not only happy and productive in your own life, but for the company as well. And so realizing that even if it might feel like a short-term loss, oh, people are taking vacation, oh, people aren't, working maybe as hard as you might want, realizing that this is actually going to be not only for the employees' medium and long-term benefit, it's going to be for the company's medium and long-term benefit, to make sure that people are happy and healthy and enjoying themselves, rather than feeling like they're just, out there grinding every single day.
Yeah. So I want to hand this to Danielle in 1 second, but I'm going to take a personal privilege, and in the spirit of making this fun and not just a question of progressive values. I did 8 years in the Obama administration. Right after we left, which was not the like right off to the sunset moment that maybe we'd hoped to be, but me and my wife did a round the world trip. It ended up almost by chance being 80 days. So kind of had a like big Instagram hashtag of around the world in 80 days. And we went to Tanzania for safari. We went to Vietnam, Japan, the French Italian Riviera, the Greek islands. And it was all amazing. But I think 5 of the 10 best meals I ate on that whole 80-day trip were in Hanoi. And I'm curious, for people that are kind of stroking their chins, thinking about like, what's the first trip I want to do when I get the hell out of here after a pandemic? What is a place where you've gone to and have just been amazed by the food, where you didn't even expect it, maybe?
Oh man, Hanoi is up there. I went to the place that President Obama went with Anthony Bourdain, got that Obama bun cha, and it was life-changing. I'm assuming you got it as well, Jesse.
Got that as well. That was one of the 5.
My God, that was incredible. As far as, because I'm the same way. When I like to travel, I don't care that much about nightlife. I don't care that much about, historical ruins. It's the food that really kind of motivates me, and why we walk 10 miles every day when we travel, so we can get hungry and eat more food. For me, those places, when I think of, gosh, where I really want to go to eat again, Oaxaca, down in southern Mexico, just incredible gastronomy, and everything from the street tacos that cost 15 cents that have just the most incredible flavors, to the mole, to the chapulines, if you're a little adventurous, want to eat some of the kind of fried crickets that they have there, to just some of the asaderos, the like barbecues that they have. It's one of those places. There's like Hanoi, like Tokyo, like San Sebastian in Spain, where every single restaurant you walk into, it's just going to be an incredible quality. You don't need to make reservations before. You don't need to pick out, what are the best of the best, because the bar is so high in in Oaxaca, that I struggle to think of a bad meal that I had there.
All right, Danielle, you can go now. Get
Oh,
get
thank
back to
you.
politics or whatever you're going to talk about.
Thank you, Jesse. Okay, first of all, now I'm hungry. Second of all, Scott, I want to thank you for all of the great flights that your services provided me to go visit my family who live in the Caribbean. Yes, I am #blessed about that one. But I do want to talk about the pandemic a little bit. It's kind of been a little thing that we've been dealing with for the last several months. And obviously, it was a huge destabilizing force, especially in the tourism and travel industry. Cruises were shut down, airlines changed their seating capacity. I think even Amtrak reduced their capacity on trains as well. So, Scott, I'm curious what you think. Did the travel industry receive the same type of support that other industries received? Did you think it was enough? And as is always the problem when you're dealing with big industries, where did workers come out in this support that was given?
Yeah, great question. So look, the travel industry, no secret, took it on the chin for the past 15 months. And when you think of the types of worldwide events that could really hamper the travel industry, it's something like a global pandemic that's especially spread through aerosols and close contact. And so I'm really glad at the outset I didn't know how bad it was going to be or how long it was going to last, because it would have been much scarier and much more daunting than, early on we didn't know, was this going to be a month, a couple months, who knew? Um, Look, the past 15 months was a real, I think, struggle for the airlines, who were down. They saw passenger counts down 90%. This is one reason why you see the rental car industry in such a mess right now, why it's impossible to find an affordable rental car, in large part because they didn't receive really any support. They had to basically liquidate their industry, liquidate their fleets, and they're now trying to rebuild from scratch. And it's a lot harder to rebuild from scratch than to try to do so if you've gotten some support along the way. And I think that's true in a lot of ways in business, as it is true in life, and why, I was so pleased to see things like stimulus, things like PPP, all these things that are helping support not only companies but workers along the way, so that folks weren't going to find themselves just going through this entire financial crash and then have to rebuild from scratch in the beginning. Look, at Scott's Cheap Flights, we were down, but not nearly down as much as I would have expected if you had told me what the pandemic would be like. We went down about 5% throughout the pandemic, which, again, compared to most travel industries, is I never like being down, but I would gladly take that for a 16-month ongoing pandemic. And one of the things that we really kind of focused on from the beginning was trying to make sure that we could do everything we can to avoid having to either cut anybody's salary or lay anybody off. Because look, at the end of the day, I'm still a squish. Like, I feel terrible if I have to fire anybody. I feel terrible if I have to say no to anybody. It's just, it's not something I'm good at, not something I enjoy doing. And so part of that, I think, though, infuses into the DNA of trying to make sure we always are putting workers first, and we're always trying to do everything we can. And so that was, it's like one of these kind of 6-point plans, but point one was myself and our CEO, Brian, we would cut our salaries to $1. And point number two, the leadership team around us would cut their salaries, and on down the line. And it's only on if we got through all 6 things would we then consider any layoffs or salary cuts, because we wanted to demonstrate to everybody, we care about you. We don't want to lay anybody off. We want to get through this together, and we're going to put ourselves, in the front of the line, in the same way that, like, a general is going to be right at the front of the pack. And so that was kind of the way we took it. And I feel so lucky and grateful that we were able to make it through the pandemic without having to do any layoffs or salary cuts. And, starting in March or so, we saw that inflection point. We saw that excitement of travel starting to really show up in our numbers, and it's just been growing ever since.
That's great. So how do you think the pandemic has changed the way we fly? I know that's like in every way. And do you think that there are, COVID inspired practices that were successful that airlines might keep around for the foreseeable future?
This is a really good question. So there are a couple things that changed that I would expect to be permanent changes. One is, even though I don't think the mask mandate is going to be permanent, I think it'll likely be gone probably I don't have any inside knowledge, but probably I would guess by the end of this year, somewhere thereabouts. I would expect to see masks on plane being a much more common sight just voluntarily going forward. I know I'm going to feel much more inclined to wear a mask if I'm flying during flu season going forward, just because I don't want to get the flu. Like, I've been vaccinated, but I'd like to still reduce my risk if I'm going to be around a lot of people. The second thing that you saw airlines change that's going to be a permanent change is getting rid of what are called change fees. If you used to be, when you booked your flight, your dates were pretty well locked in. And if you wanted to change your travel dates, you had to pay, $200, $300, $400, sometimes more, just to change your travel dates, plus any fare difference. Fortunately, what the airlines realized is that people need this flexibility. They're like going to demand it. They're not going to book flights right now or during the pandemic unless they have that flexibility. And so the airlines quietly last fall got rid of change fees basically across the board. American, United, Delta, Hawaiian, Spirit, or not Spirit, none of the budget airlines, unfortunately, but the big airlines all joined Southwest in saying, when you book your flight, you can change your dates without any penalty. If your new dates are more expensive, you do have to cover that fare difference. But if your new dates are cheaper, you actually get the difference back in the form of a travel credit. So in my mind, that's all the more reason to be prioritizing cheap flights. Those are a couple of the changes that I would expect to be permanent. The big one that I think we don't know how it's going to play out is business travel. What's going to happen with business travel as remote work becomes more common, more accepted? I think most folks do accept there's going to be some amount of reduction in overall business travel, but how that will play out, I think, is anybody's guess. Will that lead to less business travel because folks aren't in office, or will it lead to more business travel because folks are working from home and they need to find times to get together? Just last week, I was with the Scott's Cheap Flights leadership team in Seattle for our first leadership meeting since the pandemic began. We all had to fly up there. And so, I could see it go either way. I think anybody who makes too confident a prediction of the future of business travel is probably deceiving themselves, or worse, deceiving you.
Yeah, my husband works for one of the biggest hotel chains in the world, and something that they're looking at doing is combining like the business travel with the family vacation to entice more people to travel. Go to your conference, but tack on like family activities to do that.
That bodes well for the type of destinations business travels to is going to be going to, more business meetings in Hawaii, more business meetings in Cabo. Sounds good to me.
I'd be in favor of that. So, obviously there are tons of communities that rely on tourism as the backbone of their economy. My family comes from some of those communities. What sort of impact has the pandemic had on, the people who live there? What do you think they need to recover to entice visitors to come back? I know this is a broad question because it really depends on the region, but I really also want to get your take on this movement towards a more responsible and sustainable type of tourism. My sister lives in Rome, Italy, and I follow her and her friends on Instagram, and just there in Venice, obviously they took a huge hit during the pandemic, but they are trying to figure out the tourism folks, like how do you bring back people, but in a sustainable way that isn't, trashing your city, polluting the environment, like all of that. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, look, when I took that $130 flight to Milan, one of the side trips I did during it was going on a hike through Cinque Terre, those picturesque seaside villages on the Italian coast. And I remember stopping in at a little kind of B&B restaurant there and talking with the server and asking her, how do you like living here? What do you think of all the tourists coming through? Expecting it to be, they're kind of annoying. They, I don't know, they break things, they do whatever. Her answer was, I love it. And I'm so grateful because growing up in this village, I always wanted to stay here, to raise a family here. But there weren't many job opportunities, before Cinque Terre became this big tourism attraction. And so she figured, look, when I get older, I'm just going to have to move to Milan or one of the big cities in order to be able to support a family and make money. And so the fact that tourism became a big thing there allowed her to stay where she wanted to and to raise her family there. And this was one of those things that felt like, so like, duh, of course, like, I think we oftentimes fall into a little bit of a trap when we talk about tourism and vacation by only focusing on the tourist and only focusing on the vacationer, not realizing that, it's a two-way street. Like focusing, oh, what responsibility do you have as a vacationer? Is it wrong to be traveling right now? This and that, but not realizing that for a lot of folks, I mean, there was an estimate that I've read that 10% of the world's jobs in one way or another are supported by tourism. Hundreds of millions of people around the world who rely on folks being able to travel, being able to visit one another, and that those restaurant jobs, those tour operator jobs, those little small hotels, those big hotel chains, all of them are required, need folks to be able to do that such human desire of being able to travel and explore and see things. And so rather than it feeling like something where you feel a little, I don't know, self-conscious, oh, should I travel? Is this a bad thing on net? Realizing that there's actually, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like, oh, it's good for me, so it's bad for the destination. I would argue it's a pretty positive sum game, that it's not that there aren't any excesses. Like, yeah, I would prefer that people not be jerks. I'd prefer people not, break things or destroy monuments when they're in national parks or things like that. But I mean, look, all you have to do is go look at some Florida Man headlines to disabuse yourself of the notion that only tourists behave poorly. Like, there are plenty of ill actors around the world. And so I think there are a lot of good efforts that can be made to make tourism more sustainable, especially in some of the most popular places. I'd love to see, for instance, congestion pricing and some of the tourism taxes to help try to make it so that it's sustainable and that our grandchildren and their grandchildren can continue to enjoy these things. But on the whole, my opinion is basically, I think the fact that so many more people can see so many of the iconic sites around the world is an unabashed good thing. I think that democratization and taking travel, 100 years ago, travel was something that was purely reserved for the wealthy and the aristocratic. And I think it's a wonderful thing now that we're living in what I call the golden age of cheap flights, and that folks can, ordinary folks, a 22-year-old with the dream who lived in DC and wanted to go explore the world, can do that now, rather than it being just for the sort of landed gentry of yesteryear. And I think if we can, as long as we can curb the excesses and make sure it's sustainable in a way, this is a wonderful thing that tourism is so much more broadly accessible than it used to be.
I didn't think we were going to hear landed gentry today in this conversation.
I've been watching a lot of Downton Abbey. Okay, it's on the mind.
Okay. Well, with that, Jesse, I'll kick it back over to you.
Yeah, no, I grew up hearing about, well, maybe take a year off and backpack across Europe, and it's kind of like, really, it's not that cheap, you know what I mean? You're not, you like, your parents gotta have 10 grand to let you do that for a year. And I totally agree with you. Like, it feels like there is a new opportunity, and like, I really do encourage people to kind of look at Google Scott's Cheap Flights and look at it. Like, I went on one of my first big international flights to South Africa, Cape Town and kind of the southern coast there, on a flight from Scott's Cheap Flights years and years ago. And, it was $600 round trip or something. And I mean, it just, that was one of many trips, but, actually one of the most. So that really just opened my eyes to kind of the breadth of humanity a little bit. You go to a country that is just saturated with almost the essence of Mandela. I mean, you just hear it in everybody's voice and everything they think, and they're always looking for progress and always looking for, optimism. And, it was a life-changing thing for me. And I think this kind of thing is, when younger staffers come to me and ask me for like kind of a piece of advice, at first I'm kind of flattered. I must be very wise, and then I realize I'm just old.
No.
But the number one thing I tell them is A, take your vacations, and B, take those vacations and travel abroad, see the world.
Jesse, if I might, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think sometimes we fall in the trap of thinking of vacation as only something you enjoy during the trip itself, only, for that week or two when you're sipping cocktails on the beach, or going for a much more further flung trip to South Africa or wherever. But one of the things that I really get into in the book is that the travel is something that you actually enjoy far more before your trip and after your trip than you do on the trip itself. And it's not that you don't enjoy vacations, but it's that people underestimate how powerful the anticipation of a trip is. When you have a trip on the book, even if it's 6-8 months away, you're every day, you're daydreaming, you're mentally planning, you're excited, and having something to look forward to is such an important thing for humans that I think was an underrated aspect of how much many of us struggled over the past 16 months, was not having something that we felt like we were really looking forward to, not having that trip on the books, that exciting vacation. But then to your point, Jesse, the memories of a vacation are such a powerful thing, because you're only on your trip for a week or two, but those memories from that trip, you get to enjoy those for the rest of your life, and you get to recount that time you were hanging out on the beach in Cape Town and on the southern coast, and those people you interacted with in Joburg, and that safari you were at in Tanzania, and all those things really kind of not only enrich who you are, but you get to almost like a rental from Blockbuster of yesteryear that you just get to keep playing on repeat and pulling out anytime you want. And that's such a wonderful thing that I think a lot of people don't give enough credence to when thinking about how we enjoy travel and vacations.
No, absolutely. I remember kind of walking around the last days of the Obama White House and went up to Gene Sperling's office, who was one of Obama's economic advisors and has kind of been an economic advisor for Democratic presidents back for Clinton. He's in the Biden administration now. And he was cleaning out his office, and he said, I've spent about 12 years of my life in this office. And I tell you, I did great things, but it's all blur. And I spent a week in Paris with my wife, and I remember every minute. And that stuck with me. But I wanted to ask you next about your book, and which is take more vacations, essentially. And what are we've talked about this a little bit already, but what is like a nugget that is in there that like people might not think of kind of intuitively just from seeing the title?
Yeah, so I'll give you one of the questions that I'm constantly asked, Scott, how do you get cheap flights? And it'll just be like from a very high level. And obviously, it's not the easiest question to answer because I wrote a whole book on it. But the best kind of singular piece of advice that I can give folks is that if cheap flights are a priority, make them a priority. Right now, the way most people plan their vacations is actually gets it entirely backwards if they're hoping to get cheap flights. So the way that most people do it is a 3-step process I call the destination first method. Step 1, they decide where they want to go. Step 2, they decide when they want to go there. And only on step 3 do they look, well, what do the flights cost? And by setting price as the last priority, it's not terribly surprising that we end up with some pretty expensive flights. And so what I recommend is, look, if you want to make cheap flights a priority, if you really want to be able to travel and get more cheap flights and take more vacations, take that same 3-step process and flip it on its head. Step 1, where are there cheap flights out of my home airport right now? I just took a look right before coming on here. Out in the past 2 weeks alone, out of DCA, we found flights from DCA this summer to Alaska for $260, to Turks and Caicos for $279, or to Portugal or Iceland for $348 round trip. So step 2, which of those places seems most interesting to you. Oh, I would love to go to Turks and Caicos. Never been. I know that beach looks amazing. Yes, let's go there. Step 3, what dates work for my schedule? Oh, I could go August 24th through 31st. And yes, those cheap flights are available then. By setting price as the top priority rather than the last priority, that's how you get cheap flights. And that's how you take 3 vacations for the same price you used to pay for one. I think that the mistake that a lot of folks make is when we plan our trips, we kind of put on blinders and we only look at one place and we act as though this is the only destination in the entire world we'd be interested in going to. When in reality, just imagine that, a flight to Paris is $1,000, but a flight to Rome is only $300. Where are you going to go? I think most people would say, I'd rather go to Rome for $300. I can take I can take 2 of my buddies. I can go for still cheaper than what it costs for one flight to Paris. And if I really want to go to Paris, I can just take a budget airline when I get to Europe. I could take the train. There are any number of different options. And so
or I could go with my partner, but I can spend an extra 2 or 3 days there.
Yeah, not only that, you can actually have a much better vacation during the trip itself because of all that money you say. When I was in Milan on that $130 trip, I'm usually, I'm embarrassed to say, I'm usually a pretty unsurprisingly tight-fisted person. I'm like, do I want to get that extra Aperol spritz? Do I want to get that truffles on that linguine or something? I'm like,
yes.
No, I don't think so. But for that trip, I was like, gosh, I saved $800 on the flight over. Yeah, I think I can afford it. Like, let's do this. And so you end up having a better vacation, not only because the experiences that you get to buy are better, but because you don't have that same sort of mental burden that's hanging over your shoulders, that tenseness of like, ooh, am I enjoying myself to make this worth it? I paid so much on flights, so I better scrimp this whole time. And that's it's a real kind of stress throughout a vacation that is, I think, kind of acts as a little bit of a mental tax during the time when you're supposed to be relaxing and enjoying yourself and being much more carefree. And so this is why I think cheap flights are not only something that saves you money, but actually are even better than we thought they were, because they help you take more vacations and better vacations as well.
Yeah. So, one last question for me, but and not to get overly philosophical, although I was a philosophy major, so probably I'm getting overly philosophical, but, partly through this conversation, looking back at the pandemic, I think that just is increasingly striking to me is that it just reshuffled everything in a way that as we go back to normal, I think all of us are appreciating the good things that we missed, but also recognizing the bad things, such as, not being able to change your flight, such as a tipped minimum wage for a waiter of $3 an hour, who gets that's all they walk away with if it's a slow day, and maybe they want to look for a different job actually. And I think there, you can kind of go through a list of things like that. And I'm curious, it's purely speculation, we're just coming out. I'm curious if you think people will start thinking about travel and vacations and having their own time in a different way, having had this reshuffling and kind of being able to look at things anew.
Yeah, it's certainly my hope. I think it is absolutely going to be the case that with a certain subset of workers, folks who are working in offices, who have the types of jobs that can be done remotely, that there is going to be much more power in the hands of workers to be able to demand, some number of days remote, some amount of hybrid, more amount of vacation travel, even some amount of like, hey, I'd like to go, live in Valencia for the next month or two. I'll still be, working like normal Eastern time hours and everything, but this is where I'd like to be. And I think you're going to find, just with the economic conditions going the way they are, that the workers are going to have much more power to be able to make those sorts of demands and have them granted. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I think balancing the things we enjoy in life with our jobs and our professional obligations is a really important thing that for too long has shifted too much to the side of the professional obligations and not enough to the side of the things we enjoy outside of work. Where I worry, though, is for the types of jobs that can't be done remotely, and that
Mhm.
you have to be in person, which is still the majority of jobs, and you don't necessarily have that same sort of leverage or negotiating power. And so I'd like to, this is why I'd like to see something like, um, start with just paid parental leave on a federal level, but even something more like, I think everybody should be able to be entitled to a paid vacation. Like, I don't think that's asking too much, and I think it's unfortunate that it's viewed kind of as a gift, as a charity.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yes, here, have a vacation, rather than it being something that everybody should be entitled to. When you look at the number of guaranteed days, paid days off in the US compared to every other country in the world, basically, it is heartbreaking, because
Yeah.
most people around the world are able to take time to enjoy themselves and not have to worry about, the missed wages, the missed salary that they're doing in order to take that vacation. And I'd like to see the US get there as well.
Yeah. No, like a month, like
Sure,
is not
great.
actually.
I would take that month in a heartbeat.
Yeah, that's a normal thing in Europe. It's like, well, we've got this month off. We're going to go to
It's
Crete.
why August
Right.
exists.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. In Italy in August, my sister, when people are like, "Oh, I'm going to come visit," in August, like, okay, beware that a lot of places are shutting down because people are getting out of town and going to the country or the beach.
Mhm.
So we've asked a lot of questions of you. I want to ask some questions from our audience. We got a great one here. We've seen the video in the last couple of years of airlines treating passengers with disabilities poorly.
Mm.
What changes can and should airlines make to better accommodate passengers with disabilities? Are there simple fixes, or will it take larger reworks of policy?
This is a great question, and I know this has been a hot topic. Everything, especially you see it oftentimes with, guides like seeing eye dogs and other sorts of guide animals, and whether or not they should be allowed on planes. Folks having pretty strong opinions on both sides. Where I think you see this really showing up right now is a lot of companies in the airport struggling to hire workers, in many ways because I think they're not paying enough. But you see, for instance, a lot of folks who might need wheelchair assistance having to wait for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, an hour. I've seen sometimes multi-hour waits just because there aren't enough people working that at the company that the airport is contracting to be helping those folks who need wheelchair assistance. Whether this, this is not something that I think I would say I know the exact policy solution to, but it's heartbreaking to see that folks who are are like living with disability or something, are finding themselves not being able to enjoy the same sort of service and travel protections that folks who are fully able are able to. And so yeah, I mean, certainly something that I'm hoping will start to improve here soon.
Great, thank you. Another question from a subscriber. They're wondering if they can filter for economy plus for domestic flights or business class for international flights.
Yeah, absolutely. So just last week we launched our new elite tier. So we've been getting questions for folks for years. Yeah, Scott, I like those $300 economy flights to Europe, but got a little more money. I'd like to be able to fly those business class seats here. The lie flat seats, pretty comfortable, can sleep, show up rested. And what we found is that, look, a really great business class flight to Europe costs like $1,800, because a normal price is like $2,500. I mean, it's a lot more than economy. But for folks who are hoping to get those, I still wanted to be able to help them be able to make sure they're not overpaying for those flights and still getting a good deal. So that's why we created this new elite tier, so that folks who would be interested in those $1,700 Europe business class flights can get those, while not filling up folks' inboxes with $1,700 flights to Europe who might only be able to afford $300 or $400 flights to Europe. So we just launched that last week, and you should be able to find it if you log into your account at scottscheapflights.com.
Great. Another great question here. You mentioned Iceland earlier. This person asked, we've seen places like Iceland and Vietnam rocket in tourist popularity. Where's the next must-go spot?
Ooh, I love this question. One place that I have been to that I've been Okay, I'll actually give you a few options here. I'll give you three, one for different regions. So one will be the Baltics, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. Incredible countries, beautiful, great kind of East meets West type of architecture, food, history at a fraction of the price of most countries in Western Europe. That, but English very widely spoken, especially among younger population. I would not be surprised at all. Estonia is already starting to get pretty popular. I think that's going to continue. Number two, in terms of places that are really going to get popular, Taiwan. Taiwan is an absolutely gorgeous diamond in the rough. I mean, incredible food. I mean, Jesse, you talked about delicious places. Taiwan, oh my goodness.
So good.
A lot of folks might in the US have had introduction with things like soup dumplings, xiaolongbao, going to Din Tai Fung or elsewhere. Taiwan is the spot for great food. But what's really cool about it too is there's so much great like outdoorsy stuff. There is a hidden gem location that I cannot believe is isn't more popular, called the Taroko Gorge. This is this kind of gorge on the eastern side of the country where you can essentially rent a scooter, rent a moped, and be riding through. And imagine you're just like driving through the Grand Canyon, except instead of it being this brown desert, it's just this lush green kind of jungle type atmosphere with, temples built into the mountainside. Just incredibly gorgeous that I'm still to this day surprised it's not more popular. The third one that I'll recommend that I think is going to get quite a bit more popular, Trinidad and Tobago. The reason why I think Trinidad and Tobago is going to get more popular is that it's unlike most countries in the Caribbean, its economy is not currently primarily relying on tourism. It's much more of a business, I think, and other sorts of industry focused country, but I think there's a ton of room to grow in tourism, and especially the food scene in Trinidad and Tobago is unbelievable because it, given the sort of history of Trinidad and Tobago, it's this beautiful blend of Caribbean food, African food, and Indian food that just comes together in some incredible dishes in Trinidad and Tobago that I do not see all popularized all that much, but I think will blow up probably in the next 5 or 10 years. In fact, if I can give a little plug, one of my absolute favorite restaurants in all of DC is a Trinidadian place up near Walter Reed named Teddy's Roti. Just incredible, and was one of the reasons why I actually wanted to go to Trinidad and Tobago in the first place. So those would be my three predictions. But I don't know. Do either of you two have any guesses on where it's coming around the corner?
No. I rely on people like you, Scott, to tell me where the next hot stuff is.
There you go.
What about you, Jesse?
That's tough. A lot of the places I've been have kind of like been on the kind of hot lists, one way or another. But I actually would almost go back to where I started, where I think if people have not been to South Africa and Cape Town and done the drive around the southern coast, and kind of felt the atmosphere there, they're missing out on kind of like just a unique slice of humanity that has like kind of come out from one of the great atrocities of the past decades of apartheid, obviously, but like done it in a way that is trying to get better. And just the food there is also one of these unique blends where there's obviously the African influences, but there's a ton of Indian influences. There's just a ton of kind of different cultures that have been fused there. And to some extent, I wouldn't, this is more a question of like, I think it should be the next wave, as opposed to going in the stock market and putting all my money there. But I really encourage people to kind of go there. It's like, it's a long flight, but if you have 10 days or 2 weeks, it's super worthwhile, super affordable, and go to Scott's Cheap Flights and you can like get a ticket you can afford.
There you go. The last thing that I'll say too about Vietnam is that even though it's gotten more popular, I think it's actually going to get quite a bit more popular still, not only because it's such a wonderful and unique country, but because nonstop flights are likely to begin from the US for the first time this fall. Right
Wow.
now, you have to connect if you're flying there, whether through Japan or South Korea, China. But beginning this fall, a new airline, Bamboo Airways, is likely to start flying directly to Vietnam, and I think that'll really kind of boost the number of folks who want to go there.
Great.
Along the lines of your first answer, I'd say I have a good friend who just did a 2-week trip to Georgia, which was extremely inexpensive, but I couldn't believe how beautiful the photos were that she sent back. And for that matter, you sit down at your table at the restaurant and they give you like a half liter of vodka for free for no reason, which was like a little like, that was a little aggro, but no,
great wine destination too.
Yeah, I think that whole area is, that's probably going to be bumping up on people's lists.
Great. We have one last question. I think it's a great one to end on. This viewer asks, if we're trying to live our progressive values as we travel, are there specific airlines or other travel companies that you've seen that have either great progressive employment practices or great green initiatives?
I'll tackle the second part that I'm more familiar with. There's a funny thing with airlines and emissions that I think is really important to get into, because it's 100% the case that airlines are a contributor to emissions and global warming. Best estimates, somewhere between 2 to 3% of global emissions are from airplanes. And so the question is, then how should you feel about that as an individual traveler? And one of the things that we find is that the greenest airlines are actually the budget airlines. So ones like Spirit, Frontier, and whatnot. And the reason why they're considered the greenest is because they have the most people on board. Look, I don't love having the super cramped, tight legroom seats, but the one silver lining to it is the fact that it is actually a greener way of flying than if you have much more kind of room to spread out and whatnot. Because if the additional emissions from each individual extra person on board is almost nothing, but the emissions from a plane that's carrying 20 people versus the emissions of a plane that's carrying 200 people is virtually the same. But that one carrying 20 people obviously is carrying 10 times the number of people. It would only have to fly once, whereas that plane carrying 20 would have to fly many times to transport the same number. And so if you do find yourself on a Spirit or Frontier or other budget flight for your next one, you can feel good that it's at least the greenest airlines in the US. And one of the things I actually argue in the book is that another silver lining of cheap flights is that the less you pay for your ticket, the less culpable you are for that airplane's emissions. And the reason why is if you get a cheaper flight, you're just not giving airlines nearly as much incentive to add an additional flight on that route to add, than if you had paid, $1,000 for your flight to, let's say, Paris. Because if you paid $1,000 for that last seat to Paris, the airlines might look at, this is a really profitable route. Let's add another plane on this. Let's fly it again. Whereas if you paid $250, $300 for that flight to Paris, they're saying, we actually kind of lost some money on that. That wasn't very good. Maybe, we don't need to add an additional plane on that. So this is one of the reasons why I argue that the cheaper your flight, the less culpable you are for that plane's emissions.
Yeah, and I imagine even as much as people hate the baggage fees on those budget flights, actually that's contributing to the same effect that you're talking about, which is you can fit more people on the airplane. And for that matter, adding the more kind of just baggage you just add on and on, the more, the more emissions, the less people you can fit. So, it's one of those places where there's a balancing effect.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I am both hungry for lunch, but also very excited for my upcoming travel. Scott, I want to thank you so much for joining us on The Tent. For those listening, feel free to hit us up on Twitter at The Tent Pod. That is at The Tent Pod. And we will be, please be sure to tune in to us every Thursday morning. Again, Scott, thank you so much. Congratulations on all your success. And let me just be the first to wish you an early happy birthday, because I know how you feel about that.
Thank you so much, Daniella. Thank you, Jesse, and thank you, everybody, for your wonderful questions. It was great to be here.
Great talking.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.